Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Hello, my friends. It's Lynda Lippin here, welcoming you back once again to the Pilates Goddess podcast. So, you may notice that I titled this episode, When in Doubt, Leave It Out. And this is true on a number of levels and for a number of things, but especially in Pilates and exercise. So a little history. When I first started doing Pilates back in 1986, 87, when I was an undergraduate at SUNY Purchase, now known as Purchase College, I worked with a teacher who was running the studio named Steve Giordano. And Steve is a very well-known teacher and did equipment manufacturing and, has had a very full Pilates career. And one of Steve's favorite sayings was, when in doubt, leave it out. And he used to tell me that both as a Pilates client, but also as he started to see that I was getting a little kind of more interested in learning Pilates also from the potential teaching side. And I still use that in my head all the time when I'm teaching. The reason why I decided this as my podcast topic for today and for this week in particular is I've noticed, as I always do, a number of conversations on Pilates groups on Facebook and LinkedIn and different places where I'm hearing and reading teachers asking questions like, so I have a client who says or refuses to do a roll back because she says it really hurts her back. So how can I teach this to her in a way that doesn't hurt her back? Or I have a client who always gets a shooting pain every time she lifts her leg in a specific position. Why is she getting that? And how can I teach this particular exercise to this client? And every single time I read a question like that, quite frankly, my answer is don't. Do something else. And that's kind of what Steve taught me with his when in doubt, leave it out. So I thank you for that, Steve. This will come up in your Pilates teaching and in your doing of exercises a lot in your life, especially if you continue moving and exercising and you continue teaching Pilates for decades like I have. I'm not always as careful with my own body as I am with my clients' bodies. And that is typical, actually, of many of us. You'll see that there's a whole lot of injured Pilates teachers walking around. Some of us came to Pilates originally because of injuries, but some of us, get injured because we literally insist on taking our bodies through exercises that we think we should be able to do, but really these aren't necessarily great exercises for us. And I'm going to give you a few examples of this in my own body, and I'm going to give you a few examples of this in some of my clients' bodies and how we have managed to work through it, really using the when in doubt, leave it out strategy. And it really is a strategy. It's a thing. As a former philosophy professor and somebody who really enjoyed reading a lot of Nietzsche, I love a good aphorism, and when in doubt, leave it out is a great aphorism. So in my own body, and I've talked about this a few times on the podcast over the last few months, but I discovered about a year or so ago that I have a very big vertebral and disc deterioration on the right side of my neck. And when you look at it on an MRI, it's kind of scary looking, because instead of seeing like that straight column down of the cervical vertebrae, when you look at the right side of my neck, it literally indents in this kind of little acute angle that comes in. And it was really interesting when I saw that, because I always thought, and I have had right shoulder injuries before, but I thought that all of the stuff that I was experiencing on my right side was as a result of old shoulder injuries and not necessarily a neck thing, right? Or a cervical disc and vertebrae thing. And there were a few things that came out of kind of that discovery, right? Number one was when I really understood that pushing the shoulders down onto the rib cage is not a good thing to do and is not a good cue for clients. And you may be thinking, oh my God, I use that cue all the time, Lynda. I always tell my clients to push their shoulders down and get their shoulders out of their ears and do these things. Well, when I was talking to the neurologist, when I had this kind of diagnosis discussion and we were looking at, my films on her computer screens, I said to her, oh, well, this kind of explains a lot now, because of the location of the deterioration. I find that if I consistently push my shoulders down, I get more exacerbated nerve pain into my neck and into my arm. And that is because if you really think about it, your collarbone and your shoulder blades anatomically are just sitting on top of your rib cage, right? Like your armpit area is created by your shoulder blade and your rib cage, right? And then your collarbone in the front. And by pushing down all the time, what starts to happen is, number one, you're compressing the ribs, right? You are literally pushing your first few ribs at the top down, which is not so great for the rib cage and does, add compression and can add, especially if you're working with people who have osteoporosis or tech neck or forward head posture. They don't need to be compressing that area, because that's actually going to make, if they have a little bump at the very top of their thoracic spine, which we all have a little bit, but some have a very pronounced one, that's only going to make that worse. Okay. But the second thing that does is, when you push the shoulders all the way down into the rib cage, is that it starts to destabilize your neck and your cervical spine, because then there's a downward drag on the muscles that connect to each of your cervical vertebrae and to your skull, and that connect them into your shoulder girdle and your rib cage. So I looked at the neurologist and was like, oh, that's why I like to bring my arms up overhead. That's why I like to open my shoulders. That's why I like to do shrugs and shoulder rotations and things where I'm actually moving them and getting them to move. And she was like, yes, 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 Lynda, do more of that, and less of the pushing down. But the other thing that this made me realize, and I was talking actually to a colleague about that in a workshop I taught this weekend, is I started to do, in doing home exercise and doing, a lot of Pilates mat, is I decided to go back to kind of the old school Pilates mat and do all of the rolling and inversion exercises. So I'm rolling like a ball and I'm doing the roll over and I'm jackknifing and open leg rocking and sealing and, doing all the things. And my neck got even worse. But of course, at the time that I was doing these things, I didn't know what exactly was happening with my neck and my shoulders. But yeah, it turns out that doing inversions and doing rolling and being in that kind of flexed position and doing that is really bad for my neck and my shoulders. So guess what? Guess what, my friends? I don't do those exercises anymore. I'm fine. My neck feels better. My shoulders feel better. I'm still functional, still doing well, just not doing a lot of rolling and a lot of inversions. And it's absolutely fine. Now, if you teach Pilates or do Pilates, you just may be sitting there going, but Lynda, there are so many of those rolling exercises in Pilates. And I say, yes, but there are also hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other exercises. So once I realize that even if I'm on the apparatus, that say short spine and long spine and overhead are not going to be great movements for me, that tower is not going to be a great movement for me, that airplane with the leg springs is not going to be a great movement for me, that anything that puts that kind of weight and pressure into my neck is not going to be helpful. I stopped doing them. And when I stopped doing them, I started to feel better. Now, do I still do Pilates? Of course I do Pilates. I just don't do those exercises. And when I get to any exercise in any modality, whether I'm, weight training or doing some yoga or doing cardio or working with bands or working with my Thai 4, whatever that is, when I get to an exercise where I think, could this possibly exacerbate my neck today? I decide that question indicates a level of doubt, and I leave that exercise out. My colleague over the weekend was telling me a very similar story where, she, like myself, has been doing Pilates for years, has been teaching Pilates for decades, has her own studio, is in basically my demographic in terms of age, in terms of the kind of clients she sees. And she did the same thing. Suddenly she was home. She was doing her own mat practice. And even though she rarely teaches a lot of the inversions and the rolling and these exercises, she decided, to do it herself. And sure enough, started getting migraines and neck things that, in fact, were a result of doing that. And it's so funny because I thought she questioned it herself before she did them and then did them anyway. So what I want to say to you guys listening is that if we do that to ourselves, there's a good chance that every once in a while we might do that to a client. Surely you have been in the studio or in your training or in a class, right? And you've seen somebody say stop and say, I can't do that exercise, or this hurts my back, or this hurts my shoulder, or this hurts my neck, whatever it is. And I don't know about you, but I have sometimes watched, and I probably did this myself early on in my teaching, I have no doubt, where we try to work through it. And sometimes we do that ourselves on our own, where we're like, well, it doesn't feel so great, but maybe if I try it this way, it might feel a little bit better. And I'll watch teachers literally spend like 10 to 15 minutes trying to worry through one exercise. When they could have spent that 10 or 15 minutes skipping that one exercise and doing 10 other things that would have probably been more effective, less frustrating, and more interesting and fun for both the Pilates teacher and the Pilates client. I've also seen this in personal training and in the gym. I've seen this in yoga, where we're like, oh, so when that person lifts their right arm up, it always hurts. So how can I get them to lift their right arm up without it hurting? Well, if it always hurts, it always hurts. Okay. There's a point where sometimes I'll say to a client, have you had this diagnosed? Have you ever, had anything done here? And sometimes I'll share my story, right? Like, because I had nothing diagnosed for a long time. I made assumptions about where my shoulder pain was coming from, and I was completely wrong. It was referred neck pain. Okay. Or I spent, at least a decade or more of my Pilates teaching career teaching people to push their shoulders away from their ears. Yeah, I did that too. And did it to myself, and probably, didn't help the situation by doing so. Now, I don't feel bad about that because, frankly, we can only teach to the best of our ability and the best of our knowledge at any given point in time. Okay. And that is the best we can do for ourselves. And that is the best we can do for our clients. But when you do know better, then is the time to just skip over some of those exercises. It's really okay. And I'm telling you right now that all of the stories that I have from his clients who I've worked with as a student have all said that Joe didn't teach everybody every exercise. He did not. He modified things. He skipped things. Sometimes he made things different and harder, depending on the client. But basically, if you were in pain and you had a lot going on, even Romana, who, everybody in the contemporary Pilates world thinks just pushed everybody through, every exercise, regardless, she did not. She modified stuff. She changed stuff. During the AIDS epidemic here in New York City, when she was working with a slew of clients who were dying, sometimes they would just come in for 15 or 20 minutes and she would just get them to move and breathe a little bit so they felt a little bit better and a little more functional. Maybe they just stood against the wall. Maybe they just did a few rollbacks, and that was all they needed at that particular moment in time. So if you are from either an exerciser or an exercise trainer and teacher perspective, worried about those exercises that your clients either can't do or hurt them or hurt you, leave them out. It's really okay. Because if every time, say, somebody tucks their pelvis under and rolls back away from their legs, their lower back is screaming, no one wants to have that experience. So first of all, if you want your clients to really continue coming back, and I don't mean coming back for the short term, I mean coming back to the point where, year after year, I have the same clients in my book. They take the same spots. I'm basically confirming all of 2023 with my clients right now because they all want their same appointments at their same times that they've had for years. A lot of them are the same times they had me in the studio. They have me now at the same time at home, online, and they want to keep those appointments. And the reason why is because they don't get hurt and they consistently feel and function better. And that's partly because there are exercises that for particular clients, I just don't do or leave out. I'm going to close with a couple of client stories. So I have a woman who I work with now, and she had been having a lot of shoulder pain, neck pain, and wrist pain. So she goes to her doctor, she goes to the ortho, they send her to physical therapy. And they're like, okay, so generally, what movement sets this off for you? And she says, push ups, particularly tricep push ups where my, upper arms are glued in toward my rib cage. And the ortho and the physical therapist looked at her and said, so don't do those. Trained professionals, medical professionals looked at my client and just said, so don't do them. Do other things. There's other ways of working your chest. There's other ways of working your triceps. You can hold a plank. You can do tricep extensions. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. So you do not need to be forcing yourself into an exercise that hurts you enough that it brought you to an orthopedic surgeon and a physical therapist. It's the same thing with my neck. Okay. Then I had a client who was having a lot of lower back pain and a lot of lower back tension and radiating nerve stuff down her legs. And so she goes to the doctor and she goes to the ortho and she goes to the physical therapist. And they say to her, so what are the movements that cause this for you? This excruciating lower back pain? And she says, mostly things where I'm rounding my spine and tucking my pelvis under from the bottom, or trying to do a teaser or a V-sit or boat, depending on what fitness modality you're used to hearing the name of. And again, the medical professionals were like, so don't do it. There's all these other things that you could be doing that could be, more fun, more useful, and better for your body and not cause you severe pain. So if you're a Pilates teacher and your tendency is to just keep people going and keep worrying an exercise over and over again that hurts them, I'm going to encourage you to stop. I am going to encourage you to leave it out. I am going to also encourage you to leave out similar exercises and similar shapes that may cause the same pain and frustration for your clients. This does not mean that you need to make things easy. This simply means that you need to make it so that people are not in pain and that they are feeling good with the work that you're doing and feel like they're progressing and getting better. And trust me, spending 10 to 15 minutes out of somebody's session that they're paying for, trying to position them through an exercise that hurts them is really not conducive to those clients continuing to come back, right? So I'm going to end the way I started. When in doubt, leave it out. Not everybody needs to do every exercise. And frankly, my friends, there are so many exercises in this world that people can be doing that if there's something that hurts them, They don't need to do it. They really don't. I know we were all taught as Pilates teachers that all bodies, should be able to do these things, but no, that's really not how the human body works. It's not how the brain works. It's not how the nervous system works. Okay. So you want people to leave the studio not feeling frustrated, not feeling in pain, not questioning what you're doing and what they're doing. You want people to leave feeling better than when they walked in. And you want them to feel like they got some good exercise in. Okay. So leave out those things that are hurting people, leave out those things that are questionable. And if you go back into the podcast archives over the past few weeks, there is an episode about the Pilates order and why there is an order to the exercises that Joseph Pilates kind of created. Because a lot of contemporary Pilates teaching programs do not teach the exercises in any kind of order. And it's not necessarily that the order itself is intrinsically important, although I believe it is for a number of reasons. But the order will allow you and your clients to sort of memorize in your brains and your bodies kind of what's going to come next. And if you have that in your head as a teacher, and you not only know what's going to come next, but you know what's coming after that, and what's coming after that, and what's coming after that, then it makes it very easy to skip an exercise. I teach women with chronic pain and osteoporosis. So when I'm teaching and we get to something like rolling like a ball, we don't do that. I either come up with some interesting, modification, or I just skip over the entire darn exercise and we just go right into the ab series. And it's fine. No one has an issue with that. I have a lot of women with stenosis who, still need to work their back extensors a little bit, but hyperextension hurts them. And so, maybe they don't do full swimming. Maybe they don't do full swan, right? But they still get a little bit of work, but not so much that it makes them miserable and makes them not want to do it. Okay. We want to encourage people to be moving healthily for the rest of their lives. And Pilates can do that. Okay. So when in doubt, leave it out, my friends. And remember, you may remember that coming from me, but I also want you to remember that really it came from Steve Giordano. And Steve, if you're listening, thank you, thank you, thank you for introducing me to the Pilates work the way you did so many years ago when we were both undergraduates at Purchase. So everybody, thank you so much once again for joining me here on the Pilates Goddess podcast. I do want to announce that I am starting a round of my very famous and very effective Strong Bones Pilates program. This is a 4-week online program that is geared to women with osteoporosis and chronic pain. Okay. We meet for a private every single week of those 4 weeks, dedicated classes twice a week. So you're exercising with me 3 times a week in privates and classes. I also teach you how to use the Tie 4 from the Physical Mind Institute. I teach you how to properly use Pilates magic circles, light hand weights, rollers, and other, inexpensive but very effective things that can help mimic some of the Pilates apparatus that you might use in the studio in your very own home. This program will get you ready for 2023 in a balanced and much stronger way. It will teach you how to move properly. It will teach you all the modifications that you need for your osteoporosis and for whatever chronic pain situation you're having, whether it's, hips, knees, arthritis, joint replacements, vertebral deteriorations in your neck. Hey, I know all about those. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to go over to lindalippin.com/strong-bones. And of course, I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes. We start on January 8th. You will be done by the beginning of February, and you will be ready to start 2023 feeling better, moving better, and being stronger. So guys, if you love the podcast, I would love it if you would go over to the Apple Podcasts app, leave a rating and a written review. If you're listening on Spotify, you can leave a star rating on Spotify, which I would love, or go over to the Pod Chaser link in the show notes and leave a review there. Either way, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.